Russian Marines and paratroopers supported by North Korean reinforcements are hurling themselves at Ukrainian positions in western Russia's Kursk Oblast, determined, it seems, to force the Ukrainians out of Kursk before US President-elect Donald Trump is inaugurated in January. Elements of 3 powerful Ukrainian brigades are holding the line along the left flank of the 250-square-mile Ukrainian salient in Kursk, but they're outnumbered and outgunned by the Russians and their foreign allies. The Kremlin is apparently willing to accept enormous casualties recapturing Kursk from the Ukrainian troops that invaded the oblast in August. Very cruel fights are taking part in the Kursk area, Ukrainian drone operator Kriegsforscher reported. Popping smoke to obscure their movements, Russian paratroopers from the 51st Airborne Regiment and Marines from the 155th Naval Infantry Brigade attacked Ukrainian lines head-on Monday. Kriegsforscher counted 18 Russian BMP, BMD, and MT-LB infantry fighting vehicles and armored personnel carriers laden with infantry as well as 5 T-72, T-80 and T-90 tanks, all organized into 3 groups. Ukrainian drones and tanks met the assault. The fighting was chaotic and bloody, and, in the end, the Russians left behind 15 IFVs and APCs and 3 tanks, the terrible price of their frontal assault. "We are very lucky that they do a lot of banzai attacks," Kriegsforscher noted. The fighting is close and confusing. According to Kriegsforscher, 2 Ukrainian tank crews, possibly from the newly reorganized 17th Heavy Mechanized Brigade, rolled out to meet the Russians and crossed paths with, but failed to notice, 4 Russian BMDs or BMPs full of infantry. The Ukrainian tankers didn't spot the Russian vehicles until the vehicles disgorged 15 paratroopers. That's when the tanks opened fire, destroying 1 BMD. It's not unusual for entire Russian squads to get wiped out in a single blast. During an assault on Saturday, 15 Russians dismounted from 1 or more 51st Airborne Regiment vehicles. Kriegsforscher claimed their drone unit killed or wounded every single Russian, contributing to what may have been record Russian losses in recent days. Ukrainians are dying too. The Russians reportedly captured and executed 6 Ukrainian troops along the front line in Kursk recently, extending a series of brutal killings of prisoners, largely perpetrated by the 155th Naval Infantry Brigade. With the front line in eastern Ukraine dangerously buckling under relentless Russians' attack, Ukraine is struggling to find spare troops to reinforce Kursk. Russia, on the other hand, can count on thousands of North Koreans to bolster frontline units in the oblast. A regiment from Russia's elite 76th Airborne Division may also be on its way to Kursk, if Kriegsforscher's intelligence is accurate. The Kremlin's objective is the town of Sudzha at the center of the Ukrainian salient in Kursk. The military-political leadership of the Russian Federation has decided to regain control over Sudzha in Kursk Oblast before the inauguration of the next US president, the Ukrainian Center for Defense Strategies explained. President-elect Trump has pledged to end the war in Ukraine. His main, so far unenforceable proposal is to freeze the front line wherever it is. If the armistice were today, that would mean handing Russian President Vladimir Putin 45,000 square miles of Ukraine and handing Ukraine 250 square miles of Kursk. Putin clearly aims to retake Kursk before a possible ceasefire, thus erasing potential Ukrainian control over any part of Russia. There's an urgency to the Russian assaults that belies this political tumult. Eschewing clever tactics, Russian troops are attacking head-on, dying in droves and positioning Russia for one of 2 contingencies: a favorable armistice or another year of costly fighting. The artillery fire, air raids, and movement of armored vehicles are so intense in Sumy that it is a stark contrast compared to Ukraine's weak position in the hottest spots in Donbass. Sumy province is the rearguard of the 3-month-old operation that has allowed Kiev's forces to occupy part of Russia's Kursk region. The soldiers interviewed in late October in the area say that if there is anything they need, it is more weapons. The number of troops deployed is clearly greater than that of their brigades retreating south of Donetsk. Nobody in Kursk is complaining about the lack of personnel. Rotations in the State Border Guard platoon commanded by Vadim take place every 10 days. At first, it was every 3 days, says this veteran soldier, who prefers not to reveal his last name. But in places in Donbass besieged by Russian forces, such as Kurakova, the average time that infantry units must spend on the front line is 25 days, according to 4 brigades consulted by this newspaper this October. The invasion of Kursk is a personal gamble for Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, and on the success of the operation depends not only his political fate, but that of the country. Demonstrating to Russia that it is vulnerable and that its territory can also be threatened is one of the 5 points of Zelensky's plan for victory, a document that he has presented to his international allies to improve Ukraine's situation in the war, and to arrive at potential future peace negotiations in a position of greater strength.